Maria, let's start at the very beginning. You're sitting in a beautiful beachfront property right now, but 6 months ago, you were homeless and pregnant with just $28 to your name. Take us back to that moment when you first saw the Seahorse Motel.
Tony, I remember standing in the rain, soaking wet, staring at this crumbling building that looked like it hadn't seen guests in decades. The paint was peeling, windows were boarded up, and there were weeds growing through the parking lot cracks. But something about it called to me. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was hope, but I knew I had to have it. When I saw that price tag of $28 due to some clerical error, it felt like the universe was finally throwing me a lifeline.
But you had no idea what was hidden in those walls, did you?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Maria, when our listeners last heard from you, you'd just signed those papers at the courthouse. But I'm curious about something. What was it like walking into the Seahorse Motel for the first time as the actual owner?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I keep thinking about the smell. Isn't that strange? You'd expect me to remember the broken windows or the peeling paint. But it was the smell that hit me first. Salt air mixed with something else. Old wood, maybe mildew, but underneath all that was this scent of hope, I suppose, like the ocean was trying to reclaim something beautiful.
Hope has its own fragrance, doesn't it? Tell me about that first walkthrough. What did you see beyond what the county assessor's photos had shown you?
The photos didn't capture the light, Tony. Even with half the windows boarded up, there were these shafts of golden sunlight cutting through the main lobby. The registration desk was still there. This gorgeous piece of driftwood that someone had polished and shaped by hand. Behind it, the old room keys were still hanging on their little hooks, like guests might come back any moment.
It sounds almost frozen in time. What was the motel's story? Had you learned anything about the previous owners?
From what the clerk at the courthouse told me, it belonged to an elderly man named Harold Westbrook. Ran it for 37 years with his wife until she passed. After that, he just couldn't keep it going. The clerk said he'd been in some kind of care facility for the past 2 years, and the county took it for back taxes.
37 years. That's a lifetime of guests, of stories. Did you find any traces of Harold and his wife when you explored?
Oh, Tony, their presence was everywhere. In the office behind the front desk, there was still a coffee mug on the windowsill with "World's Best Innkeeper" painted on the side. A calendar from 3 years ago was open to October, and someone had drawn little hearts around what must have been their anniversary. Room 12 still had fresh linens folded on the bed, like she'd just finished housekeeping.
That must have been deeply moving, especially given your own circumstances. Here you were, 8 months pregnant, homeless, and suddenly you're the caretaker of someone else's life's work.
Pause. It felt like a sacred trust, if that makes sense. I remember standing in what used to be their private quarters. There was a kitchenette with herbs still growing in little pots on the windowsill. Basil, rosemary, thyme. Somehow they'd survived on rainwater and sunlight all this time. I took that as a sign.
A sign of resilience. Speaking of survival, Maria, what were your immediate needs that first night? You owned a motel, but was it habitable?
Barely. The electricity had been shut off, but the water was still running. Cold only, but running. I chose room 7 because it faced away from the main road and still had intact windows. The mattress was questionable, but I'd slept on worse. I had my sleeping bag, and more importantly, I had walls around me and a door I could lock.
That sense of security must have been precious. But I imagine the isolation was intense too. What did the night sound like there?
Soft laugh. You'd think it would be quiet, being right on the beach, but the ocean never sleeps, Tony. There were waves, of course, but also night birds, sandpipers, I think, calling to each other. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the wooden walkway that connected the rooms, but when I'd look out, there'd be nothing but moonlight on sand.
That sounds almost mystical. Were you frightened, or was there something comforting about those mysterious sounds?
Both, honestly. The logical part of my mind knew it was just old wood settling, maybe small animals, but there were moments, especially late at night when the baby would kick, that I felt like Harold and his wife were still there somehow. Protective spirits, maybe. I'd whisper to them sometimes, tell them I'd take good care of their place.
It sounds like you were already thinking beyond just having shelter. When did you first start imagining the Seahorse Motel alive again?
The morning after my first night there, I walked the entire property. 12 rooms total, each one with its own little covered porch facing the ocean. The swimming pool was cracked and full of sand, but the shape was still beautiful, kidney-shaped, with hand-laid tiles around the edge. There was a barbecue area with picnic tables, and someone had planted bougainvillea that was now growing wild over everything.
Paint me a picture of the beach itself. What was your backyard like?
Pause. Tony. I'd never owned anything that touched the ocean before. The beach stretched about 200 yards in each direction before hitting the rocky outcroppings. The sand was this gorgeous silver-gray color, and there were tide pools full of starfish and anemones. At low tide, you could walk out about 50 yards and still only be knee-deep in water.
It sounds like paradise. But I have to ask, with such valuable oceanfront property, were you surprised that no one else had snapped it up, even at the assessed value?
That's the question that kept me awake, Tony. Even in its condition, this was prime real estate. The tax assessment valued it at $68,000, which seemed impossibly low, but the clerical error that made it $28? That seemed almost deliberate.
Deliberate how? What made you think it wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence?
Little things. The paperwork had been sitting in the system for exactly 2 years. Not 1 year and 11 months, not 2 years and a week. Exactly 2 years. And when I asked the courthouse clerk about other interested parties, she got this strange look and said something about phone calls that had been made, but then mysteriously withdrawn.
Phone calls that were withdrawn. That suggests someone was keeping other buyers away. Did you have any theories about who that might be?
Not then. I was too focused on immediate survival, figuring out how to get the electricity turned on, where to buy groceries, how to make the place livable. But I did notice that the mailbox was stuffed with letters, official-looking envelopes from companies I'd never heard of.
What kind of companies?
Development firms, mostly. Pacific Coast Enterprises, Meridian Holdings, something called Westwind Properties. All very professional letterhead, all very interested in discussing opportunities related to the Seahorse Motel property.
How long had those letters been accumulating?
Based on the postmarks, they started arriving about 6 months ago. Right around the time Harold would have been declared incompetent to handle his own affairs, I'd guess. Some of them were marked urgent and time-sensitive offer.
So while Harold was in care and unable to respond, developers were circling. That timing seems significant.
Very significant. And Tony, here's what really bothered me. Several of the letters referenced prior discussions and our previous agreement, like they'd been negotiating with someone, even though Harold was supposedly unreachable.
That suggests a middleman, or someone with power of attorney. Did you ever find out who had been handling Harold's affairs?
That took some digging. Turns out he had a nephew in Portland who'd been appointed guardian. But when I tried to call the number listed in the court documents, it was disconnected. The address led to a vacant office building.
A phantom guardian. Maria, at what point did you start feeling like you'd stepped into something much more complicated than a simple property purchase?
Long pause the morning I found the first note.
Note?
Someone had slipped it under the door of room 7 while I was sleeping. Plain white paper, typed message. It said, "Mrs. Westbrook, we know you're concerned about Harold's medical expenses. Our offer stands. Please contact us soon."
They thought you were Harold's wife, but she had passed away years earlier.
Exactly. Which meant whoever left that note hadn't been watching the property very carefully. They just knew someone was staying there and assumed it was family. It was signed WP, which I figured meant Westwind Properties from the letters.
That must have been unsettling. How did you respond?
I didn't. Not right away. But it made me realize I needed to understand what I'd gotten myself into. So I spent the next few days going through everything Harold and his wife had left behind. Carefully, respectfully, but thoroughly.
What did you discover in that search?
Their story, mostly. 43 years of marriage, 37 running the motel. Photo albums full of happy guests, holiday parties, Community events. Harold had been the president of the local small business association. His wife, Eleanor, taught Sunday school and organized beach cleanups.
They sound like pillars of the community. Did you find anything that explained the mysterious interest from developers?
Not directly, but I found something else. In Eleanor's jewelry box, there was a small brass key that didn't match any of the doors in the motel. And in Harold's desk, I found architectural drawings that didn't match the current building layout.
Architectural drawings? What did they show?
Additional rooms, Tony. Underground spaces that aren't part of the motel as it stands now. Storage areas, maybe, or something else. The drawings were dated 1987, just 2 years after they bought the place.
So, Harold and Eleanor had built something beneath the motel. Did you try the brass key anywhere?
I searched everywhere I could think of. Every door, every cabinet, every storage shed on the property. Nothing. But the drawings showed access points that should exist, but don't. At least not obviously. It made me wonder if they knew something I didn't. Why would companies be so eager to buy a rundown motel unless there was something valuable about it beyond the real estate? And why would someone maintain a fake guardian just to field offers?
Those are troubling questions. Maria, as you were uncovering these mysteries, how was your pregnancy progressing? You were entering your final month.
Touch his stomach. The baby was getting restless, like they could sense the tension. I was having more false contractions, and my back ached constantly from sleeping on that old mattress. But strangest of all, Tony, the baby seemed to respond to the ocean. Every evening when the tide came in, they'd start moving, like they were listening to something I couldn't hear.
Perhaps they were. Maria, in those early days of ownership, did you have any contact with neighbors or local residents?
The nearest neighbors were about a quarter mile down the beach, an older couple who walked their dog past the motel every morning. They'd wave but keep their distance. I got the impression they were curious but cautious about the new owner.
Cautious in what way?
Like they were waiting to see what kind of person I was, whether I'd respect what Harold and Eleanor had built. One morning, the woman stopped and called out that she was glad someone was taking care of the place again. She said it had been heartbreaking to watch it sit empty.
Did she share any memories of Harold and Eleanor?
She said they were the kindest people she'd ever known, always helping folks who were down on their luck, never turning away anyone who needed a place to stay, even if they couldn't pay full price. She said Harold used to joke that the Seahorse Motel was a halfway house between despair and hope.
A halfway house between despair and hope. Maria, given your own circumstances, how did that description resonate with you?
Pause. It felt like destiny, Tony. Like maybe Harold and Eleanor had been preparing this place for me without knowing it. Every day I spent there, I felt stronger, more capable. The baby and I were both thriving despite the basic conditions.
And yet, those mysterious letters and notes kept coming. How was that affecting your sense of security?
It was like living with a constant, low-level anxiety. I'd find myself checking the locks multiple times each night, listening for footsteps on the beach, watching for cars that slowed down when they passed the motel. I knew I wasn't imagining the interest, but I didn't understand the urgency behind it.
Maria, as we wrap up today's conversation, I have to ask, did you ever consider taking one of those offers, walking away with what would have been a substantial profit?
Firmly, never, Tony. Not once. Whatever Harold and Eleanor had hidden, whatever those developers wanted, I knew in my bones that the Seahorse Motel was where my baby and I belonged. I was going to fight for it, even if I didn't yet understand what I was fighting against.
Maria, I'd like to take our listeners back to that first night you spent in the Seahorse Motel. What was it like walking through those doors, knowing you owned the place but having absolutely no idea what you'd gotten yourself into?
Long pause, Tony. I remember standing in that lobby with my one duffel bag, and the silence was so thick you could almost taste it. The air smelled like salt and something else, something musty and forgotten. There were these old registration cards scattered across the front desk, and I picked one up. The ink had faded to this ghostly blue, but I could still make out a signature from 1987.
35 years of abandonment. That must have felt overwhelming for someone in your condition.
8 months pregnant and exhausted, yes. But you know what struck me most? The wallpaper in the lobby was this faded coral pink with little seahorses swimming up toward the ceiling. In the dim light coming through those salt-stained windows, it looked like the seahorses were moving, like they were trying to escape toward something better.
You mentioned the previous owner in our last conversation. Had you learned anything about him by that point?
Not much, just what the clerk at the county office told me. Harold Pemberton, that was his name, owned the place for 43 years before he passed. Never married, no children. The way she said it, Tony, with this sad little shake of her head, made me think he was one of those men who poured his whole life into something and then just faded away with it.
What did you find when you started exploring the rooms?
Soft laugh, room 7. Had a family of raccoons that had made themselves quite comfortable. They looked at me like I was the intruder, which I suppose I was. Room 12 had this beautiful Art Deco mirror that somehow survived all those years without a crack. When I looked into it, I could almost see the women who had stood there before me, fixing their hair, getting ready for dinner dates or romantic walks on the beach.
The motel sits right on that stretch of coastline that's been the center of so much development pressure. Were you aware of that history?
Not initially, but I learned quickly enough. The next morning, I was trying to figure out which room might be safest for me and the baby when this black sedan pulled into the parking lot. 2 men in expensive suits stepped out, and they walked around the property like they were measuring it with their eyes.
Did they approach you?
Oh yes. The older one, silver-haired, very polished, introduced himself as representing some development group. He asked if I was the new owner, and when I said yes, his whole demeanor changed. It was like watching someone put on a mask, Tony. Suddenly he was all smiles and congratulations, telling me how lucky I was.
Lucky how?
That's exactly what I asked him. He said the property had tremendous potential, that I could make a fortune if I was willing to work with the right people. But the way he said it, the way his eyes kept scanning the building, I got the feeling he wasn't really talking about the land value.
What did your instincts tell you about these men?
Pause. You know how when you're pregnant, everything feels more intense? Your senses are sharper, your intuition louder? These men made my skin crawl, Tony. The younger one never spoke, just stood there taking pictures with his phone. And when I told them I wasn't interested in selling, the older one's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes.
Tell me about that first week. How did you manage, practically speaking?
The electricity had been shut off for years, but the water still worked, though it ran rusty for the first few minutes. I found some old candles in what used to be Harold's office, along with a Coleman lantern that still had fuel. Room 3 had the best mattress, so I made that my temporary home. I'd lie there at night, listening to the waves and feeling the baby kick, wondering what Harold had felt during his last days here.
Did you find any personal effects from Harold? What else did you discover in that office?
Hesitant. Well, there were these architectural drawings, blueprints of the motel. But they showed things that didn't match the actual building. Extra rooms, spaces that should have existed but didn't. At first I thought maybe Harold had planned renovations that never happened, but the drawings were dated from when the motel was first built.
That's curious. Did you investigate further?
I tried, but I was getting tired more easily, and I had other priorities, like figuring out how to get the power restored and finding a doctor who would see me without insurance. But those blueprints kept nagging at me, especially when I noticed that the measurements of certain walls seemed off.
Off how?
Room 8, for instance. According to the blueprints, it should have been larger. But when I paced it off, there was about 4 feet missing from the back wall. Same thing with the supply closet near the office. The space just didn't add up.
Did you share these observations with anyone?
Who was I going to tell, Tony? A pregnant homeless woman talking about mysterious blueprints and missing wall space? I'd already gotten enough strange looks at the grocery store when I paid for crackers and milk with food stamps and gave the Seahorse Motel as my address.
How did the community react to your presence there?
Most people were kind, actually. There's Mrs. Chen, who runs the little market down the road. She started setting aside day-old pastries for me, never charged full price. And Father Miguel from St. Catherine's came by to check on me, brought blankets and offered to help however he could. But I could tell people were curious about what I was really doing there.
Curious in what way?
Thoughtful. Well, here's this abandoned property that everyone assumed would eventually be bulldozed for condos, and suddenly there's this pregnant woman living there. claiming she bought it for $28. I think some people wondered if I was telling the truth, if maybe I was just squatting and making up stories.
But you had the legal documents.
I did, but even I sometimes wondered if it was all real. Lying there in that room at night, listening to the building creak and settle, feeling the baby turn and stretch inside me, it felt like I was living in someone else's dream. Like maybe I'd wake up back under that bridge, and the Seahorse Motel would just be another beautiful thing that belonged to someone else.
Yet here you are, several months later, still fighting to hold on to it.
Firmly, because I realized something important during those first few weeks, Tony. This place chose me as much as I chose it. And whatever secrets Harold left behind, whatever those men in expensive suits really want, I have a responsibility now. To Harold's memory, to all those families who made happy memories here, and to my baby who's going to be born into this strange, wonderful inheritance.
Maria, when you first approached the Seahorse Motel that day with your $28, what did you actually see? I mean, really see, beyond just an abandoned building?
Long pause. You know, Tony, most people would have seen decay. Peeling paint, broken windows, weeds growing through the parking lot cracks. But I saw something else entirely. Maybe it was desperation talking, or maybe it was hope, but I saw potential. The bones of the place were still good, you know. Those old Florida motels from the 60s, they built them to last.
Paint me a picture of that moment. You're standing there, 8 months pregnant, carrying everything you own.
The salt air was so thick you could taste it, even though the ocean was still a quarter-mile away. There were these massive sea grape trees that had grown wild around the property, their leaves rustling like paper in the wind. The motel sign was hanging at an angle, missing half its letters, but you could still make out Seahorse if you squinted. 24 units in an L shape around what used to be a swimming pool.
What condition was that pool in?
Laugh softly. Oh, it was a mess. Filled with rainwater and debris, probably hadn't been cleaned in years. But the tile work around the edges, Tony, it was this beautiful turquoise and coral pattern, hand-laid, the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. I could picture families splashing around in there, kids doing cannonballs while their parents watched, from those metal lawn chairs.
You mentioned the previous owner in passing before. Tell me about what you learned about him.
Harold Kellerman. Ran the place for 37 years before he passed. The neighbors, the few I met that first week, they all spoke about him with this mixture of fondness and mystery. Said he was a quiet man, kept to himself, but always fair with his tenants. Some of them were long-term residents, you know, not just tourists.
What kind of long-term residents?
Working folks mostly. There was this woman, must have been in her 70s, who told me she'd lived in Unit 12 for almost a decade. Said Harold never raised her rent, not once. There was a veteran who stayed in Unit 8, and a young mother with 2 kids who'd been there for 3 years. Harold apparently had a soft spot for people down on their luck.
That's interesting, considering your own situation. Do you think that's why the universe led you there?
Pause. I've thought about that a lot, Tony. Here's this man who spent nearly 4 decades helping people who had nowhere else to go, and then I show up, pregnant and homeless, with exactly the amount needed to buy his place. It feels like more than coincidence.
What did the neighbors tell you about Harold's final years?
That's where things get interesting. They said he became even more reclusive the last 2 years before he died. Would disappear for days at a time, and when he came back, he'd be carrying tools, supplies, working on projects around the motel that didn't seem to make much sense. Fixing walls that weren't broken, reinforcing structures that seemed solid.
Did anyone speculate about what he was doing?
The woman in Unit 12, she mentioned seeing him late at night sometimes, moving between the vacant rooms with a flashlight. Said it looked like he was measuring things, taking notes. She thought maybe he was planning renovations, trying to bring the place back to its former glory.
But that's not what happened.
No. He passed away suddenly, heart attack, and within months the state had seized the property for back taxes. That's how it ended up on the auction block for $28. Some clerical error in the assessment office, they said.
Maria, when you walked through those empty units that first day, what did you feel?
Long pause. Each room told a story, Tony. You could see the impressions in the carpet where beds had been, rectangles of unfaded paint on the walls where pictures had hung. In Unit 7, Someone had written "Happy Anniversary," Margaret in pencil on the bathroom mirror. Unit 15 still had a child's drawing taped to the inside of a closet door.
That must have been overwhelming.
It was like walking through a museum of forgotten lives. But also, and this might sound strange, it felt like the building was waiting, like it had been holding its breath, hoping someone would come along who understood what it could be again.
Did you have any sense that first day of being watched?
Pause. Now that you mention it, yes. I kept feeling like there were eyes on me, but whenever I'd turn around, the street was empty. There's a gas station across the way, and I noticed the same black sedan parked there for hours. Probably nothing, but when you're in my situation, you become aware of things that might normally escape your notice.
What about the immediate neighborhood? What kind of area had you landed in?
It's one of those transitional parts of town, Tony. Old Florida mixing with new development. You've got these beautiful historic houses with wraparound porches sitting next to empty lots where something's about to be built. There's a sense that change is coming, whether people want it or not.
And you, with your $28 purchase, just became part of that change.
Exactly. Though I had no idea at the time just how much change was headed my way. All I knew was that for the first time in months, I had a roof over my head and a door I could lock. It felt like winning the lottery.
Little did you know the real lottery was hidden in the walls.
Soft laugh. Little did I know that Harold Kellerman had left me more than just a building. He'd left me a mystery that would turn my entire life upside down.
Maria, we've talked about how you settled into the motel, started making it livable, but I imagine there was a moment when everything changed, when you realized this wasn't just about having a roof over your head anymore.
Long pause. Oh, Tony. You're absolutely right about that. It was my third week there, maybe fourth. I was getting more comfortable, you know. Starting to think maybe I could actually make this work, turn it into something real.
What happened that changed everything?
I was cleaning out what used to be the office behind the front desk. Such a mess, Tony. Papers everywhere, old receipts, guest registers going back 20 years. I was just trying to make sense of it all. Maybe find some clues about how to actually run a motel.
You were teaching yourself the business as you went along.
Exactly. And I'm 8 months pregnant, remember, so I'm moving slow, taking breaks every few minutes. I'd made myself a little workspace on the floor because bending over that desk was impossible. I was sorting through this stack of registration cards when I heard a car pull up outside.
Your first potential guest?
That's what I thought. I got so excited, Tony. Here I am, barely keeping the lights on, and someone actually wanted to stay. I struggled to my feet, tried to smooth down my hair, make myself look presentable.
But it wasn't a guest.
3 men in expensive suits. The kind of suits that cost more than I used to make in 6 months. They had this way of walking, you know? Like they owned everything they looked at.
How did you feel when you saw them?
Scared. Immediately scared. When you've been homeless, when you've been invisible for so long, men in suits don't usually bring good news. But I opened the door anyway. What choice did I have?
What did they say to you?
The tall one. He did all the talking. He said, "Ma'am, we represent Coastal Development Partners. We understand you've recently acquired this property." Very polite, very smooth. But his eyes were cold, Tony, like he was looking through.
How did you respond?
I told them yes, I owned a motel. Tried to sound confident, like I belonged there. But my voice was shaking. The tall one smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. He said they were prepared to make me a very generous offer.
They wanted to buy the motel from you.
$5,000. Cash. Right there on the spot. The tall one pulled out an envelope, fanned out the bills so I could see them. More money than I'd ever seen in one place, Tony.
For someone in your situation, that must have been tempting.
For about 10 seconds, yes. 10 seconds of thinking about prenatal care, about a real apartment, about not worrying where my next meal was coming from. But then something in his manner changed when I didn't immediately say yes.
What do you mean?
He got impatient. Started talking about how the property wasn't suitable for someone in my condition. How running a motel was complicated business, required permits and inspections. How I'd be better off taking their offer and moving somewhere more appropriate.
The word appropriate strikes me as loaded.
You understand it perfectly, Tony. He meant somewhere more appropriate for someone like me, someone who didn't belong in their world. And that's when I started getting angry instead of scared.
What did you tell them?
I said I wasn't interested in selling. The tall one exchanged looks with the other two, and he said, "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. This property has significant development potential. There are larger interests at stake here."
That sounds like a threat.
It felt like one. But then something strange happened. I felt this flutter in my belly, the baby moving, and suddenly I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for both of us, for our future.
How did the conversation end?
I told them the motel wasn't for sale at any price. The tall one's smile disappeared completely. He said, "That's unfortunate. Sometimes people make decisions they come to regret." Then they got back in their car and drove away.
But that wasn't the end of it.
Not even close. That night, Tony, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he'd said about larger interests, about development potential. Why would anyone want this rundown place so badly?
Did you start looking for answers?
I went back to those papers I'd been sorting, started reading more carefully, looking for anything that might explain why 3 men in $1,000 suits would drive out to offer me $5,000 cash for a property I bought for $28.
What did you find?
Property surveys, Tony, maps, and letters from something called Seahorse Holdings LLC, dated just 2 months before the previous owner died. They were offering him $2 million for the land.
$2 million?
$2 million. For my little rundown motel that I bought for the change in my pocket. I sat there on that office floor at midnight, pregnant and exhausted, holding papers that proved someone thought this place was worth a fortune.
How did that make you feel?
Terrified, excited, confused, like I'd accidentally picked up someone else's life. But also determined, Tony. For the first time since I'd lost my apartment, since everything fell apart, I felt like maybe I had something worth fighting for.
Did you realize then that you were in over your head?
Oh, I knew I was drowning. But I also knew I wasn't giving up. Whatever was hidden in this place, whatever made it so valuable, I was going to find out, even if it killed me.
So, Maria, you'd been living in the motel for what, about 3 weeks at this point?
3 weeks and 2 days, to be exact. I was keeping track because every morning I'd wake up thinking this had to be some kind of dream, that someone would come knocking, saying there'd been a mistake.
But that knock never came.
Not the one I was expecting anyway. Pause. It was a Tuesday morning, I remember, because I'd been trying to establish some kind of routine. The baby was getting more active, and I thought maybe having a schedule would help me feel more settled.
What kind of routine were you building?
Simple things. Wake up at 7, walk the property, check on the rooms I hadn't explored yet. There were 24 units total, and I'd only really been staying in 3 or 4 of them. The rest were still mysteries to me.
You were exploring your own property room by room?
It sounds strange when you put it that way, but yes. Each room felt like opening a door to someone else's life. The previous owner, Harold Seahorse, he'd left so much behind. Personal things, business records scattered everywhere.
Tell me about that Tuesday morning. What made it different?
I was in room 18 trying to sort through some old registration books when I heard a car pull up. Not just any car, Tony. A big engine, expensive sounding. I looked out the window and saw this black sedan with tinted windows.
How did that make you feel?
Terrified. Pause. Here I was, 8 months pregnant, alone in this place that still didn't feel real. My first thought was that whoever owned this car was coming to take everything away.
But you went to meet them.
I had to. I mean, what choice did I have? I couldn't exactly hide. So I walked out to the front office, tried to look like I belonged there, like I was a real business owner, and not just a homeless woman who'd stumbled into something impossible.
Who got out of the car?
2 men in suits. Expensive suits. The kind you see in movies about lawyers or businessmen. The older one, maybe 60, had this smile that didn't reach his eyes. The younger one just stood back, watching everything like he was taking notes in his head.
Did they introduce themselves?
The older one said his name was Mr. Davidson, that he represented some local business interests. He kept looking around the property like he was appraising it, like he was calculating something in his head.
What did he want?
That's what was so strange, Tony. He started by congratulating me on my purchase. Said he'd heard about the sale and wanted to welcome me to the community. But there was something underneath his words, something that made my skin crawl.
Your instincts were telling you something was wrong.
Exactly. When you've been on the streets, you develop a sense about people. You learn to read the difference between someone who wants to help and someone who wants something from you. This man definitely wanted something.
Did he make an offer?
Not directly. Not at first. He asked how I was planning to renovate the place, whether I'd found any interesting things left behind by the previous owner. The way he said it, Maria, like he was fishing for something specific.
How did you respond?
I tried to play it cool, said I was still getting settled, still exploring. But then he asked if I'd found any old safes or lockboxes, anything that might need professional opening. That's when I knew this wasn't a social call.
He was looking for something Harold had hidden.
Had to be. And the way his whole demeanor changed when I said I hadn't found anything like that. The fake friendliness dropped away for just a second, and I saw something harder underneath.
What happened next?
He made his offer then. Said his clients would be willing to take the property off my hands for $50,000. Cash. No questions asked. Quick closing.
$50,000 for a property you'd bought for $28.
Tony, I may not have had much education, but I wasn't born yesterday. Nobody offers that kind of money out of kindness. Whatever Harold had hidden in this place, it was worth a lot more than $50,000.
So you turned him down?
I told him I needed time to think about it. But we both knew that was my way of saying no. The way he looked at me when I said that, Maria. Like I'd just made a very dangerous mistake.
Did they leave quietly?
They left. But as they were driving away, I realized my quiet life at the Seahorse Motel was about to get very complicated.
Maria, we've talked about finding the motel and discovering those first clues, but I'm curious about something more personal. How did you handle the emotional weight of all this change while being 8 months pregnant?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I think pregnancy changes how you process everything. Here I was, homeless one day and a property owner the next, but my body was already going through this massive transformation. In some ways, the external chaos felt like it matched what was happening inside me.
That's a fascinating way to put it. Did that perspective help you cope, or did it make things more overwhelming?
Both. Honestly. Some nights I'd lie awake in that creaky motel room, feeling the baby move, and I'd think about how we were both becoming something new. The motel was like my second pregnancy. But then morning would come, and I'd remember that developers were circling like vultures and I had no idea what I was really protecting.
Speaking of those developers, had there been any more contact from them at this point?
Oh yes. They switched tactics completely. After that first aggressive approach, they started sending this woman named Catherine. She'd show up with coffee and pastries, talking about how she understood my situation as a single mother, very different from the men in suits.
How did that feel, having someone try to connect with you on that level?
Pause, manipulative, but also lonely, Tony. I hadn't had many genuine conversations with other women in months. When you're homeless, people look through you. Suddenly, this well-dressed woman wanted to sit and chat about prenatal vitamins and birthing plans. Part of me craved that connection, even knowing her real motives.
That must have been incredibly isolating. Were you able to maintain your guard while dealing with that loneliness?
I tried, but she was good at her job. She'd ask about the baby's due date, whether I had family support, questions that made me realize how alone I really was. My sister lived 3 states away, barely keeping her own head above water. My mother passed when I was 25, the baby's father. Pause. Well, that's another story entirely.
Only share what feels comfortable, Maria. But it sounds like Catherine was identifying vulnerabilities.
Exactly. She'd say things like, "Maria, you're so brave taking this on alone. But wouldn't it be wonderful to have a nest egg for when the baby comes?" Always bringing it back to selling. But the strange thing was, the more she talked about my situation, the more determined I became to keep the motel.
What do you think drove that determination?
I started having these dreams about the hidden room. Not nightmares, but vivid dreams where I could see myself pulling away wallpaper, finding more clues. In the dreams, I wasn't alone anymore. There were other women there, from different time periods, all of us working together to uncover whatever Eleanor Whitmore had hidden.
Eleanor Whitmore. That was the previous owner?
Yes, and I was starting to piece together her story from old guest registries and maintenance logs I found in the office. She'd run the Seahorse for 37 years, mostly alone after her husband died. Never had children, but she'd given reduced rates to single mothers, sometimes letting families stay for free during rough patches.
So, you felt a connection to her legacy?
More than that. I felt responsible for it. Here was a woman who'd used her property to help people like me, and now developers wanted to tear it down for luxury condos. Catherine kept emphasizing how the neighborhood was transitioning, how my little motel was an eyesore that brought down property values.
How did you respond to those arguments?
I told her that maybe the neighborhood needed places for people who couldn't afford luxury condos. That seemed to surprise her. She actually paused her sales pitch and looked at me differently. For a moment, I thought I saw something like respect in her eyes.
Did that change the dynamic between you two?
It made things more complicated. She started asking questions that seemed genuinely curious rather than calculating. About my background, how I'd ended up homeless, what I hoped for the baby. But I could never shake the feeling that she was filing away everything I said for later use.
Trust must have been incredibly difficult in that situation. So you continued your investigation alone?
Not entirely alone. Pause. I had started talking to the baby about everything, explaining what I was looking for, describing Eleanor's story. It sounds foolish, but those conversations helped me think through the mysteries I was uncovering.
Maria, we've talked about those first few days at the motel, but I'm curious about something deeper. How do you handle change when everything in your life has been so uncertain for so long?
Long pause. You know, Tony, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. When you're homeless, you think you'd get used to change, right? Everything's always shifting. But this was different.
Different how?
Well, for months I'd been adapting to survive. Where to sleep, where to find food, how to stay safe. Those are reactive changes. But suddenly owning this place, having to make decisions about its future, about my future, that required a completely different kind of adaptation.
It sounds like you went from responding to circumstances to actually controlling them.
Exactly. And honestly, Tony, it terrified me more than sleeping on park benches ever did. At least when you have nothing, you can't lose anything, you know?
That's a profound way to look at it. So how did you begin to embrace that control?
Pause. I started small. The first thing I did was clean one room completely. Just one. I spent 3 days on it, scrubbing every surface, testing the plumbing, making sure the windows open properly.
Why start there instead of trying to tackle the whole property?
Because I needed to prove to myself that I could actually improve something, that I wasn't just squatting in someone else's dream. When I finished that room, I stood in the doorway and I just breathed.
What did that moment feel like?
Like maybe I wasn't completely crazy. Like maybe this baby Touch's stomach might actually have a real home to come into. But then reality hit again.
What kind of reality?
The bills, Tony. The utilities had been shut off for months. The property taxes were overdue. And I'm standing there with, $23 left after the purchase? I realized I'd bought myself a very expensive problem.
How did you solve that immediate crisis?
I didn't. Not right away. I spent 2 weeks just walking through every room, trying to understand what I actually owned. Some rooms had furniture covered in sheets. Others were completely empty. And then I found the office.
Tell me about the office.
Pause. It was like stepping back in time, Tony. The previous owner, whoever they were, had left everything. Guest registers going back 20 years. Financial records, personal photographs scattered on the desk.
That must have felt invasive, going through someone else's private things.
It did, but I also felt like I needed to understand the story of this place. How does a functioning motel just get abandoned? How does it end up selling for $28?
What did those records tell you?
The Seahorse was actually profitable until about 3 years ago. The owner, a man named Frank Castellano, had been running it since 1982. Steady business, regular guests, nothing fancy but reliable.
What changed 3 years ago?
That's where it gets strange, Tony. The records just stop. Not gradually, like a business winding down. They just stop. Like someone walked away in the middle of a normal day and never came back.
Did you find any clues about why Frank disappeared?
Long pause. I found something else first. While I was going through the desk drawers, looking for anything that might help me understand the property's value, I noticed one drawer wouldn't open all the way.
Was it locked?
No, something was jamming it from behind. When I finally worked it loose, there was an envelope taped to the back of the drawer. Old, yellowed. My name was on it.
Your name? But how could that be possible?
Pause. That's exactly what I thought. I mean, I'd never heard of Frank Castellano, never been to this motel before that day. But there it was, in careful handwriting for Maria when she arrives.
Maria, that must have been incredibly unsettling. What was in the envelope?
Pause. A key. An old brass key, much older than anything else in the office, and a note with just an address. No explanation, no context, just an address about 30 miles inland.
Did you recognize the address?
No, but something about finding that envelope changed everything for me, Tony. Suddenly, this wasn't just about having shelter anymore. It felt like I was meant to be here. Like maybe all those months of uncertainty had been leading me to this moment.
That's quite a shift in perspective. How did it affect your approach to the motel?
I stopped being scared of making the wrong decisions. If someone had left me a message, maybe they'd left other things too. Maybe the seahorse had more value than anyone realized. I decided to stop just surviving and start investigating.
Maria, we've talked about the motel purchase, the developers circling like vultures, and finding that first hidden compartment. But I'm sensing there's something deeper going on here. Something about this place that goes beyond just a business transaction.
Long pause, you're perceptive, Tony. Yes, there's something I haven't told you yet. When I was cleaning out room 12 last week, I found more than just money hidden in the walls.
What kind of more?
Letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to someone named Eleanor Seahorse, but never sent. They were wrapped in oilcloth, preserved like someone knew they'd be important someday.
Eleanor Seahorse. That has to be connected to the motel's name, doesn't it?
That's what I thought too. The letters span decades, Tony. From the 1960s right up to about 5 years ago. All written by the same person. And they tell a story that breaks your heart.
Tell me about them.
Shifting in chair, the writer was a man named Samuel. He built this motel in 1962 as a surprise for Eleanor, the woman he planned to marry. But she died in a car accident 3 days before their wedding. 3 days, Tony.
And he never sent the letters to her family?
He couldn't bring himself to. Each letter is like he's talking to her, updating her on the motel, on his life, on all the dreams they had together. He writes about painting the shutters the blue she loved, about planting the garden she sketched on napkins during their dates.
This Samuel must be the previous owner who died.
Has to be. The last letter is dated about 5 years ago, and it's different from the others. He's sick, Tony, dying. And he's terrified that when he's gone, no one will remember Eleanor or what this place was supposed to be.
That explains a lot about why the property sat empty for so long. What does he say in that final letter?
Voice softening, he apologizes to her, for letting the place fall apart after he got too weak to maintain it, for not having children who could carry on their story, for failing to make the Seahorse Motel the legacy of love he'd promised her it would be.
Maria, how has reading these letters affected you? You're carrying life inside you, rebuilding this place. There's something poetic about that.
Long pause. It's changed everything, Tony. At first, I thought I was just trying to survive, to give my baby a roof over our heads. But now I understand I'm not just fixing up an old motel. I'm completing something that was left unfinished.
That's a heavy responsibility to take on.
Is it taking it on if it feels like it chose me instead? I keep thinking about that clerical error. $28 for a property that should have cost hundreds of thousands. What are the odds?
You think Samuel had something to do with it?
In one of his letters, he writes about putting Eleanor's engagement ring somewhere safe, somewhere it could bring good luck to the next couple who found love at the Seahorse. He talks about setting things up so the right person would find this place when they needed it most.
You think he arranged for the price error somehow?
I don't know how he could have. But Tony, when I found those letters, the engagement ring was with them. A simple gold band with a small diamond. Nothing fancy, but it's beautiful in its simplicity.
What did you do with it?
I wear it sometimes. When I'm working on the motel, when I need to feel connected to something bigger than just my own survival. It sounds crazy, but it makes me feel less alone.
Not crazy at all. You mentioned regrets earlier. Are you having second thoughts about any of this?
Pause. Not about staying, not about fighting for this place. But I regret not understanding sooner what I was stepping into. Those developers aren't just after land, Tony. They know about Samuel's story, about Eleanor. They've been waiting for him to die so they could tear this place down and build something soulless.
How do you know they're aware of the history?
Because they keep mentioning Eleanor by name. Not Samuel, not the previous owner. Eleanor. They know this place was built for love, and they want to destroy that. For what? Another strip mall? More luxury condos that block the ocean view for everyone else?
That must make this fight feel even more personal.
It does. But it also makes me stronger. I'm not just fighting for me and my baby anymore. I'm fighting for Samuel and Eleanor, for the love story that never got its proper ending.
Speaking of your baby, how are you balancing all this stress with your pregnancy?
Some days better than others. I talk to the baby while I work. Tell them about Samuel and Eleanor, about the dreams we're building together. I think they understand somehow. The baby gets more active when I'm reading the letters, like they're listening.
You said Samuel hid money in the walls. Was there enough to help with the restoration?
Enough to get started, but not enough to finish everything this place needs. I think he wanted whoever found it to have a chance, but not to have it too easy, like he wanted them to earn their place here.
That sounds like someone who understood the value of working for what you love.
Exactly. And Tony, I'm learning things about myself I never knew. Before this, I thought I was just someone who things happened to, someone who got pushed around by circumstances. But restoring this place, reading Samuel's words, it's teaching me I can push back.
What's been the most challenging part of that personal transformation?
Learning to trust my own judgment. For so long, I believed other people when they told me I wasn't capable of much. But here I am, 8 months pregnant, renovating a motel, standing up to developers with deep pockets. If someone had told me 6 months ago I'd be doing this, I'd have laughed.
And what gives you the strength to keep going when doubt creeps in?
The letters. Samuel's certainty that love could create something lasting, even when everything seemed hopeless. And this baby, Tony. Every kick reminds me that I'm not just building a business, I'm creating a legacy.
You're creating the ending to Samuel and Eleanor's story that they never got to write themselves.
Softly, yes. And maybe, just maybe, I'm writing the beginning of a better story for my own family. A story where love wins, where the little person with $28 gets to keep the dream alive.
That's beautiful, Maria. But I can hear in your voice that the fight isn't over.
Not even close. If anything, it's just beginning.
Maria, we've talked about the motel, the developers, even that mysterious hidden room. But I'm curious about something deeper. What was going through your mind during those first nights alone in that empty building, 8 months pregnant, knowing you'd just spent your last $28?
Long pause. You know, Tony, people assume I was terrified, and maybe I should have been, but honestly, for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Peace. Real quiet, not the kind you get in shelters where you're always listening for trouble.
That's surprising. Most people would describe an abandoned motel as anything but peaceful.
The walls held so many stories, Tony. I could feel them. Families who'd stayed there on vacation, couples on honeymoons, kids pressing their faces against those big windows watching the ocean. All that love and memory soaked into the place. It wasn't empty at all.
You speak about the building almost like it was alive. Did that feeling change as you learned more about its history?
Shifting in chair, it deepened. See, the more I discovered about Harold Whitman, the previous owner, the more I understood why he chose me. Not consciously, of course. The man was gone. But somehow his spirit, his intention, it was still there in that clerical error, in that exact $28 price.
Tell me about Harold. What did you learn about him that made you feel this connection?
Harold bought that motel in 1967 with his wife Eleanor. They were young, full of dreams about creating a place where working families could afford a real vacation. Not fancy, but clean and welcoming. They ran it for 37 years, Tony. 37 years of caring for strangers.
What happened to them?
Eleanor passed in 2003. Cancer. Harold tried to keep going alone, but his heart wasn't in it. The big resort chains were moving in, making it harder for small places like his to survive. He closed in 2004 and moved to a retirement home inland. Died 2 years later.
And the motel sat empty all that time until you found it?
12 years, Tony. 12 years of the county trying to figure out what to do with it. The paperwork got shuffled between departments, values got reassessed, and somehow, someone entered $28 instead of $28,000. One missing word changed everything.
Do you think Harold would have approved of what you're doing with his place?
Voice softening. I found his personal papers in that hidden room, along with the other things. Letters from families thanking him for memorable stays, photos of children playing in the courtyard, cards from couples celebrating anniversaries there year after year. Harold wasn't just running a business, Tony. He was creating a haven.
That must have been emotional, reading those personal memories.
I sat on the floor of that empty room, 8 months pregnant, reading about all the life that place had sheltered. And I realized something. I wasn't just buying property. I was inheriting a legacy of care, of providing safe harbor for people who needed it.
Is that when you decided to fight the developers instead of just taking their buyout offer?
Partly. But there was something else, something about my own story that became clear in those quiet nights. I'd been running for so long, Tony, running from bad decisions, from people who hurt me, from my own failures as a mother to my older children.
You haven't mentioned your other children before.
Pa's 2 kids, grown now. I lost custody when they were teenagers. Addiction, bad relationships, choices that seemed right at the time but destroyed everything I touched. They're better off without me, and they know it.
That must carry enormous weight. So the motel became more than shelter for you.
Became possibility, Tony. Not just for me and this baby, but for other people who need a second chance. Those developers see dollar signs and luxury condos. I see what Harold saw, a place where people matter more than profit.
And you're willing to fight for that vision, even against overwhelming odds?
Harold spent 37 years proving that small kindnesses add up to something larger. Eleanor's gardens, his handwritten welcome notes, the way they remembered returning guests' names, that's worth fighting for.
Even if it means risking everything you've gained?
Tony, when you've lost everything once, you learn the difference between what you can afford to lose and what you can't live without. This baby deserves to inherit something better than my mistakes. That motel, that legacy of care Harold left behind, that's something worth passing down.
Maria, we've been talking for over an hour now, and there's something that's been nagging at me. This whole story about finding the motel for $28, the developers circling like vultures, the mysterious items in the walls. It feels like there are pieces missing.
Long pause. You're perceptive, Tony. I suppose I've been dancing around the real truth because it sounds so impossible when you say it out loud.
What kind of truth are we talking about here?
The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own life. You see, when I found that first envelope in the wall, there wasn't just cash in it. There was a letter.
A letter from the previous owner?
From Eleanor Seahorse. But Tony, it wasn't just any letter. It was addressed to me, by name, Maria Santos.
Pause. I'm sorry. What did you say?
The envelope had my full name written on it in this beautiful, careful handwriting. And inside, Eleanor had written that she'd been waiting for me to find the motel. Not someone like me specifically.
Maria, that's... How could she have known you would be the one to buy it?
That's what I kept asking myself, over and over, until I read the rest of the letter. Eleanor wrote that she was my grandmother.
Your grandmother?
My mother's mother, who I was told died when I was 2 years old. Apparently that wasn't true. Eleanor had been running the Seahorse Motel for 40 years, watching over it, waiting.
Waiting for what exactly?
For me to need it. She wrote that she'd seen me around town over the years, knew about my struggles, knew about the pregnancy. She'd been keeping track of my life from a distance.
This is extraordinary. So, the $28 price tag
wasn't a clerical error at all. Eleanor had instructed her lawyer to list it for exactly the amount she knew I had in my pocket that day. She'd been watching me, Tony. She knew I'd lost my job, knew I was sleeping in my car, knew I had exactly $28 left.
How could she have known such specific details about your financial situation?
Small town, Tony. People talk. And apparently my grandmother had been keeping very close tabs on the granddaughter she never got to raise.
What happened between your mother and Eleanor?
According to the letter, my mother left home at 17 after a terrible fight. Eleanor spent years trying to find her, to make amends. By the time she tracked us down, my mother had already told me that both my grandparents were dead.
So your mother knew Eleanor was alive?
She knew. But whatever happened between them ran so deep that she preferred I think my grandmother was dead, rather than risk us having a relationship.
And Eleanor respected that boundary?
Until she realized I was in real trouble. The letter said she couldn't bear to watch me struggle when she had the means to help. The motel was her way of giving me a future without violating my mother's wishes while she was alive.
Your mother had passed away by this point?
3 years ago. Eleanor had been waiting for the right moment ever since. When she saw me sleeping in my car, 8 months pregnant, she knew that moment had come.
This changes everything about your story, Maria. The developers, their desperation to get the property back.
They knew Eleanor. They'd been pressuring her to sell for years, making increasingly aggressive offers. When she died and the property went up for sale, they assumed they'd finally get their hands on it.
But they had no idea about the family connection.
None whatsoever. In their minds, some random homeless woman had stumbled into their prize through a bureaucratic mistake. They thought intimidation would be enough to make me sell.
What they didn't realize was that you weren't just fighting for a business opportunity.
I was fighting for my inheritance, for the grandmother I never knew I had, who spent decades watching over me from afar, for the family legacy that my mother's pain had kept hidden from me.
How did this revelation change your approach to the whole situation?
Everything made sense suddenly. Why the motel felt like home from the moment I walked in. Why I felt so determined to fight for it even when the smart thing would have been to sell. Eleanor didn't just leave me a building, Tony. She left me roots.
And the other items you found in the walls?
Family photos, letters from my mother that Eleanor had saved. My grandmother had been building a bridge between us for 40 years, hoping that someday I'd be ready to cross it.
Maria, when you found those documents in the wall, what did you think they were at first?
Long pause. Honestly, Tony, I thought it was just old paperwork. Maybe insurance forms or receipts from when the motel was running. I was so focused on making the place livable before the baby came.
But something made you look closer.
The letterhead caught my eye. Seahorse Development Corporation. Same name as my motel, but this was dated 15 years ago. Then I saw my name.
Your name was on 15-year-old documents?
Not just my name, Tony. My full name, my social security number. Listed as primary beneficiary. I'm staring at this paper, 8 months pregnant, thinking I'm losing my mind.
That must have been terrifying.
I called the law office listed on the letterhead. Took 3 transfers, but finally got to someone who could access old files. That's when everything changed.
What did they tell you?
Voice breaking slightly. The original owner of the Seahorse Motel was my father.
Your father? But Maria, you said you'd been homeless, that you had no family.
I thought I didn't. My mother always told me he abandoned us when I was 2. Never spoke about him, never showed me pictures. When she died, I had nothing. No relatives, no connections, no one.
So, the $28 sale price.
Wasn't a clerical error. It was his will, Tony. A specific instruction that if I ever came looking, if I ever needed help, the motel would be sold to me for exactly $28.
Why that amount?
Crying softly my birthday. February 8th, 28. He'd been watching over me somehow, even after he died. The lawyers had been trying to find me for 3 years.
The developers who've been pressuring you.
They knew. They've known all along that I was his daughter. That this was my inheritance. That's why they've been so desperate to get the property back.
Because there's more than just the motel.
The documents showed mineral rights, Tony. Oil deposits underneath the property, worth millions. My father left me everything. and these people have been trying to steal it from his pregnant daughter.
How does it feel, knowing the truth?
Like I finally understand why I ended up here. It wasn't coincidence. It was coming home.
Maria, you mentioned earlier that Harold left you something in his letter. As you're sitting there that night, knowing Blackwood's people are closing in, what was going through your mind?
Long pause. I kept reading that letter over and over, Tony. Harold wrote about having faith in unexpected places, about how the motel wasn't just a building but a symbol of hope. I'm 8 months pregnant, exhausted. But something in his words gave me strength.
You're essentially preparing for a final showdown. How do you even begin to strategize when you're one person against an entire development company?
Harold's letter mentioned the original blueprints were hidden behind the reception desk. I spent that whole night studying them by flashlight. The motel's layout was more complex than I'd realized. There were spaces between walls, old service tunnels from when it was first built.
So, you're learning the building's secrets while planning your defense?
Exactly. And I realized something important, Tony. Blackwood's people had been searching frantically, but they didn't really know the building like I was beginning to. They were looking for something specific, but they were outsiders.
What did you discover in those blueprints?
There were notations in Harold's handwriting. Little marks near certain walls, measurements that didn't match the original construction. He'd been documenting changes he'd made over the years. That's when I understood the baby's room wasn't random.
The room you'd been drawn to from the beginning.
Harold had reinforced that entire wall section. According to his notes, he'd sealed something inside during renovations in 1987. But Tony, there was something else in that letter that changed everything.
What was it?
He wrote about choosing his successor carefully. He said he'd been watching for months, waiting for the right person to find the motel. The $28 price wasn't a clerical error.
Pause. Harold had planned this.
The letter explained everything. He knew about Blackwood's interest, knew they'd eventually come for whatever he'd hidden. He needed someone desperate enough to fight for the place, someone who understood what it meant to have nothing and fight for something better.
So, as dawn approaches and you're preparing for this confrontation, you realize you weren't just a random buyer.
I was Harold's chosen guardian, Tony, and that changed how I saw everything that was about to happen.
Maria, we're getting close to the end of your story and I can feel the tension building. You'd discovered what was hidden in the walls, the developers were circling like sharks, and you were 8 months pregnant. What was going through your mind during those final days?
Deep breath fear, Tony. Raw, primal fear. Not just for myself, but for my baby. I'd lie awake at night feeling those little kicks, wondering if I'd brought us both into something too dangerous to handle.
But you didn't run. Something kept you there, fighting. What was it?
You know, I kept thinking about that $28, how it was literally all I had in the world, and somehow it had given me everything. The motel wasn't just a building anymore. It was proof that miracles could happen, even to people like me.
People like you?
Throwaway people, Tony. The one society pretends don't exist. I realized that if I walked away, I'd be telling myself I didn't deserve good things, that I was still that invisible homeless woman with nothing to offer the world.
So, this became about more than money or property.
It became about dignity, about my child seeing their mother as someone who stood her ground when it mattered. Pause, I started making plans. Real plans, not just hoping things would work out.
What kind of plans? Were you scared of the final confrontation you knew was coming?
Terrified. But I'd learned something important during those months, Tony. Being afraid doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it means you finally have something worth protecting.
How did you prepare yourself emotionally for what was ahead?
I talked to my baby every night, voice softening. I'd put my hands on my belly and promise that we were going to be okay, that we were going to build something beautiful together. Those conversations gave me strength I didn't know I had.
Looking back, do you think you were ready for what came next?
Nobody's ever really ready for a fight that could change everything. But I was as ready as I could be. I had truth on my side, legal documents in my hand, and a fierce love for my unborn child in my heart.
Maria, you're standing in that motel room with Eddie Castellano demanding you hand over the deed. What's going through your mind in that moment?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I kept thinking about my baby. 8 months pregnant, and here's this man who's controlled half the town for decades, telling me I don't belong. But then I realized something.
What was that?
I'd spent my whole life being told I don't belong places. Foster homes, shelters, park benches, and I'd always believed it. But standing there, feeling my baby move inside me, I thought, not this time.
So you refused to give him the deed?
I looked Eddie right in the eye and said, "This is my home now. My child's inheritance. You want it, you'll have to explain to a judge why you think a pregnant woman should be homeless again."
How did he react to that?
Chuckles softly. His face went completely red. He started yelling about how I had no idea what I was dealing with, that there were forces bigger than me involved.
Did that scare you?
It should have. But instead, I felt this strange calm. I realized that Eddie was just another bully, and bullies only have the power you give them.
What happened next?
I walked past him to the wall where I'd found all those documents, pulled out the folder with the environmental reports, the bribery evidence, everything. Spread it all out on that old table.
You showed him what you'd discovered.
I said, "Eddie, seems like you've been very busy over the years. Bribing inspectors, covering up contamination reports. I wonder what the EPA would think about all this."
And that changed everything?
Pause, Tony. Watching a powerful man realize he's lost control is something else. His whole body language shifted. The bluster disappeared.
What did he say?
He got very quiet, asked me what I wanted. And you know what? In that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted.
Which was?
To keep my home, to raise my baby somewhere safe, and to make sure Eddie never hurt another family the way he'd hurt mine and so many others.
Your family?
Voice softening. That's a story for another conversation, Tony. But yes, Eddie Castellano and I had unfinished business that went back much further than that motel.
Maria, when you found those documents in the wall, what went through your mind?
Long pause, fear, Tony. Pure fear. Here I was, 8 months pregnant, holding papers worth more than I'd ever seen.
The lighthouse deed and mineral rights. What did you decide to do?
I called the county office right there, standing in that dusty room with plaster on my shoes. Filed those deeds before anyone could stop me.
That must have taken incredible courage.
You know what gave me courage? Feeling my baby kick while I held those papers. This wasn't just about me anymore.
How did the developers react when they found out?
Laughed softly. Let's just say they stopped being polite. But I had something they didn't expect.
Which was?
The law on my side, and a fierce need to protect what was mine, what was ours.
So, Maria, here we are almost a year later. When you look back at that moment with $28 in your pocket, what do you see now?
Long pause. I see a woman who thought she was buying shelter, Tony. I had no idea I was buying a whole new life.
The developers eventually backed down completely after the FBI investigation. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just walked away?
Every day. But then I watch my daughter take her first steps across those restored hardwood floors, and I know some things are meant to be.
What's the most important thing you learned through all this?
That sometimes the biggest risks come disguised as the smallest decisions. $28 changed everything because I was brave enough to spend it.
And the Seahorse Motel today?
We're booked solid through next summer. Turns out people love staying somewhere with a real story behind it.
Any advice for someone facing their own impossible situation?
Take the leap, Tony. Sometimes the net appears after you jump.
So here we are, Maria, 8 months later. When you look back at that day with $28 in your pocket, what do you see?
Long pause, a woman who thought she was buying shelter, Tony. I had no idea I was buying a future.
The developers finally backed down completely.
Once the FBI got involved with the smuggling evidence, they disappeared like morning fog. Turns out half their financing was connected to those operations.
And the Seahorse Motel today?
We're booked solid through summer. Families, couples celebrating anniversaries, even some of the old regulars from decades ago. Touch's belly little one here will grow up thinking it's normal to own a piece of the ocean.
What would you tell someone else facing impossible odds?
That $28 wasn't really what I had, Tony. I had determination. I had nothing left to lose, and sometimes that's worth more than any fortune hidden in walls.
Maria, Thank you for sharing your remarkable story.
Thank you for listening.